Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This is, of course, LBC, and you are listening to James O'Brien on a morning where I think we have to return to the Brexit fray because I guess those teeth of reality are biting now, but some people continue to pretend that they've put their nipples in a bulldog clip rather than admit that the bite is being registered by their sensations. I think of all the stupid things I've heard in the last 2 years, this idea that having the option to walk away with no deal is somehow a negotiating tactic on the part of Theresa May is a contender for the stupidest thing of all. It's a bit like saying, if you don't do what I want, I will drink paint. Or it's a bit like when a child says, if I can't get my own way, I'm going to hold my breath until I get my own way. So what happened yesterday was essentially the House of Lords told the government that they can't hold their own breath on behalf of the entire country. They will have to be policed, if you will, by the House of Commons. I also, and this is one of the great curses of being open-minded, I also struggle daily now to try and find ways into these conversations that lend themselves to something a little bit more sophisticated and intelligent than just recycling utterly bovine Jacob Rees-Mogg sound bites or Liam Fox claims that now don't even stand up to the vaguest scrutiny. There is no bargaining tactic that involves blowing your own brains out if you don't get your own way. There just isn't. There never was. The idea that we walk away without a deal, that'll teach the European Union, who will continue to be the largest single market on the planet, while we become an entirely isolated market of 50 million, absolutely in hock to whatever chlorinated chicken sellers and others want to flog us under the auspices of a trade deal that Donald Trump's own trade secretary has described as a great opportunity to cherry-pick British assets. These are all facts. These are not opinions. And yet it continues. I think the weirdest element of it for me now is the question of what they think they've won. Because taking back control, events in the House of Lords last night demonstrated that we never lost control. The House of Lords not only retains powers of scrutiny and redress, but it also on this occasion has handed power to the House of Commons, to our elected MPs. So our revising chamber has revised and amended to ensure that elected MPs cannot be ridden roughshod over by a Prime Minister, by a government. Where do you want power to reside? Well, it's all in Brussels. Yeah, right. I mean, if we were inhabiting an even vaguely sane universe together now, then everybody, even sort of whatever side of the fight you were on during the referendum, everybody now could look at the reporting in the right-wing media of the House of Lords amendments and say, well, hang on a minute, I thought all the power was in Brussels. If all the power was in Brussels, how come the House of Lords has exercised power to ensure that the House of Commons can exercise power over the Prime Minister's attempts to exercise power unchecked? So much power in Westminster. And yet we, of course, spent several decades being told by Boris Johnson and sundry other frauds that all the power was in Brussels. That would be quite a nice question, actually. I would be quite tempted to ask, what is all this power that the House of Lords and the House of Commons are exercising if all the power is actually in Brussels? But I don't think there would be many fruitful answers to that question. 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need. And then you sort of look at the way that the House of Lords is described by, I suppose one has to reach for the Daily Mail first on a morning like this. They've already gone after elected representatives, called them saboteurs. They've already gone after judges and the very notion of judicial independence by calling those people enemies of the people. They have, of course, also gone after academic independence, the idea that universities should be free to exercise their own judgment of the facts. They didn't like that. The front page then was, I think, our Remainer universities, and today, I haven't actually got it in front of me, but today, no doubt, there's sort of intimations of treason and sundry other suggestions that the House of Lords doing precisely the job that they are both appointed and hired to do is somehow bad. So I don't quite understand anymore. We've got that simple question of what is it that they think they've won, but I don't quite understand anymore what all those catchphrases meant. We need to take back control. Well, clearly, if the House of Lords can ensure that the House of Commons can prevent a power grab by the Prime Minister, then there was loads and loads of control to go around. I don't think that even counts as an opinion, does it? And then when you look at the notion that the House of Lords shouldn't be ensuring and exercising parliamentary sovereignty by delivering power to the House of Commons, the elected representatives in the House of Commons, you begin to wonder quite what they've put in the water at the Daily Mail. House of Unelected Wreckers. So the House of Unelected Wreckers, Daily Mail, of course, owned by a Viscount, but, you know, just pretend that none of us know that for the time being. House of Unelected Wreckers votes to give power to House of Elected Parliamentarians. You have to dig into the second chapter of this one, don't you? What precisely is the complaint today about the House of Lords saying that the House of Commons should have a vote? Because if the problem is that the House of Lords is unelected, then presumably the knowledge that what they voted to do in the House of Lords is give a vote to the House of Commons, which is elected, completely undermines all of your objections. The idea that the thing that they voted on somehow undermines Theresa May's negotiating position, you would have to be blinkered almost to the point of blindness to think that that constituted anything other than an inverted pyramid of proverbial piffle. Because if you and I were... I don't know what the equivalent is on a negotiation, actually, because, of course, the biggest legacy of this whole mess is the idea that the European Union is somehow our enemy and that they are dedicated to hurting us. The European Union is dedicated solely and exclusively to protecting its members' interests. We still are and would have continued to be members, but only now are we seeing how effective it is at defending its members' interests, and we're getting cross about it because only after voting to cease to be a member have we given the proper attention to the issue of how good it is at defending members' interests. I mean, everywhere you look, the madness is, well, either going into retreat, increasing number of people either pretending that they think things could have gone otherwise, or looking at the question of sabotage or enmity from the other side of the channel, or people are doubling down on their own delusions and idiocy. So the idea that you are in a strong negotiating position if you can retain the right to walk away and chop your own legs off seems to be all that they've got left today. I don't know what question to ask you. I often don't. I like that at the minute because politics is so fluid and changing. But you even have one bloke here. Who is it? Baker. What's his Christian name? Is it Greg Baker? Steve Baker actually complaining that the Lord's vote has handed Parliament, in his words, unprecedented power. Unprecedented power. Complaining that Parliament has unprecedented power. Now, I'm quite tempted to focus on that line, actually, because I thought on those occasions where a little chink of rationality and reason breaks out of the Brexit bandwagon, I thought the idea was that our Parliament had lost power. I thought that's what people had been persuaded of. Our Parliament has lost power. And now a prominent government spokesman complains that Parliament has too much power. What do you think is going on? What stage do you think that we're now in? 0345 6060 973. Tell me why you're cross that Parliament has so much power. That's the way to do it, I think, isn't it, this morning? Tell me why, as a Brexit voter who cast your vote in the belief that Parliament didn't have enough power, that it had all somehow been transferred to Brussels, they're trying now to persuade you that Parliament has too much power. So I would love you to, at risk of sounding a bit like Kevin Keegan, I'd love you just to explain that to me. How can Parliament have too much power while simultaneously not having enough because it's all in Brussels. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And if you want to have a go at explaining to me how the threat to drink paint is somehow a really good negotiating tactic when you're trying to set up a trading agreement with your former partners who you've elected to kick into touch, then I'll take that call as well today. So first question is, why is it bad that Parliament has so much power if you're one of those people that voted because you thought Parliament didn't have enough power? 0345 6060 973. And secondly, since when is it a good I mean, to threaten to walk away from a negotiation, that only really works if you keep what you had before. Do you see what I mean? If you were trying to sell me your house and we were haggling over the price of the house and eventually I got so irritated by your tactics, I just said, oh, forget it. And then I walked away. I'd be going to the house I already owned. Do you see? This is really important. And I really do feel anger at the people who've persuaded the British public not to notice this. All of these analogies are weak because there is nothing quite like the path that we've embarked upon. That is the ultimate truth that they can't admit yet. It's utterly unprecedented. But if you want to use the house buying analogy, just think of it like this, okay? Very simply. If you and I are negotiating a house purchase, I am doing so as someone with a home. I know exactly where my home is. I know how many bedrooms it has. I know what it looks like. I know how much it's worth. I know the address. I know the council tax band. I know everything about my home. But I'd quite like to buy a new one. I think we've all given up on the idea that the new one's going to be better than the old one, haven't we? No one genuinely thinks that we're going to be in a better position than we were before. If you do, 0345 6060 973. The point now becomes, if I decide to pull out of the negotiations to buy a new home off you, I go back to that home that I knew everything about. That's my withdrawal position. My old home, my current home, my quite nice home that I have and I like, but I thought maybe, as a Brexit voter, maybe I'd be able to buy an even better house than the one that I've got for free. I'm now realising that I can't, especially with Liam Fox and David Davis handling the negotiations. It's now clear to me that I can't buy a new house that's better than the one I've currently got. So I'm going to threaten to walk away. But in the context of Brexit negotiations, the no-deal threat to walk away means you're walking away without knowing where you're going to sleep tonight. You'll be able to sleep somewhere. No one is suggesting that you'll die, but you don't know what your new home is going to look like. And that was the threat that got taken off the table, arguably, by the House of Lords yesterday. The threat to pull out of negotiations to buy a new house by abandoning your old house. Just think about that for a moment. It's a brilliant negotiating tactic. If you don't sell me this new house on the terms that I dictate, I'm going to be homeless. Ha ha! Stick that in your pipe and smoke it. So now it's clear, right? Whatever Rees-Mogg might be bleating about, whatever Liam Fox might be bloviating about, whatever Boris Johnson might be lying about today, that is where we are. We're in a negotiation to buy a new home. That home is in the gift of European Union negotiators. When we threaten to walk away with no deal, they would love to sell us a new home. Obviously they would. But when we threaten to walk away with no deal, what we're saying to them is, well, if you don't give us the home that we want, we'll abandon the home that we've currently got, and God knows where we'll sleep tonight. Now, if you are listening to this absolutely incontrovertible analysis of the current situation and you still like it, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 10:18. And I hope you'll ring me to tell me why you're cross that the House of Commons has so much power, why you're cross that parliamentary sovereignty was exercised in the House of Lords last night to deliver what Steve Baker describes as unprecedented power to Parliament. So if you voted to leave the European Union because you had been persuaded by liars that all our powers had somehow been sent to Brussels, today they are telling you to be cross that Parliament has so much power. I just want you to unravel that for me if you can, okay? 0345 6060 973. And while we're at it, the second element of what the House of Lords did last night, the amendment that was passed, ensured that Theresa May would not be able to lead the country into absolute oblivion. Now, oblivion, we have to understand correctly, oblivion means you don't know what's going on around you. I suppose it's arguable you could have such a thing as a positive oblivion. But the idea that the Prime Minister was given a mandate to lead the country into utterly uncharted territory is absurd. I appreciate that there aren't many places in Britain at the moment where the truth is being told in quite such a bold and bald fashion. But it is absurd to claim that she was given permission to burn down the house we currently live in without telling us where we would be living in the future. Those are the two elements I'm looking at. How can anyone be cross that Parliament has so much power, especially if they've spent the last 10 years labouring under the illusion that all the power had ended up in Brussels? And the second question is, if you're negotiating to buy a new home, which is what the EU negotiations essentially are, how can threatening to be homeless constitute an effective negotiating tactic? 10:22 is the time. Charles is in Enfield to kick us off. Charles, what do you think?
Hi, James. Look, I think that you've slightly gone off you're asking the wrong question.
Okay, but you'll understand that you have to answer the ones I'm asking.
Well, I'll answer it. Yes, of course.
So are you cross about how much power the House of Commons has?
The question is, am I cross about the power that Parliament has? Parliament, yes, is sovereign, but it gets its power from the people.
So are you cross about the amount of power that Parliament has?
Well, I'll be certainly cross if Parliament's able to usurp the power that the people have invested in.
Who elected the House of Commons?
Who elected the House of Commons?
It's an echo.
Look, the people voted for Brexit.
Who elected the House of Commons?
Look, well, we know who elected the House of Commons.
Well, no, I just need you to say the words.
Who elected the House of Commons?
Yes.
The House of Commons has been lent power. It is lent
Who elected
power by the people.
Who?
The people
Elected the House of Commons.
They lend power.
And the House
to
of Lords reminded, I suppose, constitutional experts last night that the House of Commons exists to keep checks and balances upon the executive, the Prime Minister.
Right.
So the power that was exercised by the House of Lords yesterday was essentially a reminder of the power that resides in the House of Commons, which is, of course, elected by the people. So why are you cross that Parliament has so much power?
Because it would appear...
Oh, so you are cross that Parliament has so much power?
I'll certainly be cross if Parliament...
And were you previously of the view that Parliament's powers had somehow been transported to Brussels?
Yes, absolutely.
So where's all this power come from now that's in Westminster today?
Well,
Is that the power that's come back from Brussels, or is that just power that we didn't know about before we voted to leave the European Union because we thought all the power was in Brussels? It's like new power that we found under the bed.
Well, Parliament is assuming it is taking... this could be an attempt to take away power from the people. Brexit was an expression of the populace. Brexit was an expression of
No,
the
but
people.
it wasn't, was it? Because 17.4 million people voted for something, but if you could find three people, one who voted to be like Norway, because prominent campaigners said we'd be like Norway, one who voted because they believed Owen Paterson when he said only a madman is talking about leaving the single market, then you'd have somebody who didn't vote for the same as the person who thought that we were going to be like Norway. Then you'd have someone who believed Daniel Hannan when he said that EU citizens' rights in this country will not be affected in any way, and they voted for it because they believed him. So that's three positions that are all completely different from each other. Then you've got people who believe David Davis when he said that we'd be doing trade deals in Germany the morning after the results. So anyone who believed David Davis voted for something different from what anyone who believed Daniel Hannan voted for, something different from what anyone who listened to Liam Fox voted for, something different from anyone who listened to anyone who suggested that Norway and Switzerland provided models. So we can all agree that the idea that 17-odd million people all voted for the same thing is absurd to the point of ridiculousness. So this phrase... Well, no, it is, because there's no way anyone who voted to be like Norway voted to leave the customs union and the single market, is there, Charles?
People vote...
You have to answer my questions at some point, mate. Is there any way that somebody who voted to be like Norway, because that's what they were told we were going to be like, could be described as having voted to leave the customs union and the single market?
Oh, that's very dishonest. That's very dishonest.
Could you just answer the question? I voted Brexit because I believed the campaigners who said we will be like Norway. I voted Brexit because I believed Owen Paterson when he said nobody is talking about leaving the single market. Okay? Now we're being told that we will leave the customs union and the single market under hard Brexit. Could you possibly, I mean, I don't want to be rude, but you do understand how the person who voted to be like Norway did not vote to leave the customs union and the single market?
I'm sorry, James, but...
I'm sorry too, but I just a yes or a no, because I'm essentially asking you whether 2 + 2 = 4, and the fact that you don't want to answer speaks volumes, Charles.
No, look, James...
No, look, Charles, if I voted to be like Norway, did I vote to leave the customs union and the single market?
If you voted for Brexit, you voted to leave the customs union...
No, but I was told we wouldn't have to. I was told we could be like Switzerland. That's why I voted Brexit. So how can you claim that the person who voted to be like Switzerland is the same as the person who voted to leave the customs union and the single market? How could you claim that the person that believed David Davis when he said we'd be doing deals in Germany on the morning after the referendum voted to leave the single market without a trade deal? How could you, if you believed Owen Paterson when he said that absolutely only a madman would leave the single market and you voted for Brexit because you liked Owen Paterson, how can you now turn around to them and say you knowingly voted to do the opposite of what you voted to do? I mean, that's dishonest, Charles.
No, what I think you're doing is now trying to completely invalidate the vote.
No, I'm not at all. I'm pointing out that 17-odd million people voted for very different things, and to claim now that they all voted for the same thing is to treat the British public like idiots, and I'm uncomfortable letting anyone do that, whether it's a caller to this programme or a cabinet minister.
Well, I don't accept...
So let's just recap then. Are you here to argue that somebody who voted to leave the European Union because they believed either that we could be like Norway, or that we could be like Switzerland, or that only a madman would talk about leaving the single market, or that we'd be doing trade deals with the Germans on the morning after the result, or that it would be the easiest deal in human history? So anyone who voted for it because they believed any of those 5 positions, and we both know I could go on for ages and possibly come up with 500 different positions, are you here to tell me that actually, without realising it, all of those people voted for the same thing, Charles?
I am saying they all voted to leave, and you can't...
No, Charles, are you telling me that they all voted for the same thing? I voted to leave on the understanding that we would be like Norway. Now you're telling me we can't be anything like Norway. Are you still telling me that I voted for what you're telling me I voted for?
People voted for something.
Now, this feeling you've got inside now, that frustration you feel at the facts being laid out in front of you, that's called cognitive dissonance. And what makes you still cling to the notion that 17-odd million people voted for the same thing, despite having it very politely and intelligently explained to you how easy it is to prove that millions of them voted for completely different things from each other, that's the point at which you have to ask yourself what it is you think you're going to win. That's when you use a word like control. And then I come back to my original question, which is, why are you so cross that Parliament actually has so much control, Charles?
I'm cross that you're now trying to dissect...
Damn dissections, eh? Why can't we just go with the simple slogans instead of complicated understanding? Dissections actually show you how things work instead of just letting you look at posters.
You cannot dissect every
I just did, Charles.
Of a vote.
I just did, mate. And the answer to the question that you're not prepared to answer is, James, of course I'm not dishonest or stupid enough to argue that somebody who voted Brexit in the belief that we'd be like Norway actually voted to be the opposite of Norway. Because you can't say that out loud, Charles, because then you'd realise how silly you sound.
James, you cannot go breaking down votes.
No, God damn it, that you would actually dissect something to find out how it works. Charles, I mean, that would be insane, wouldn't it? So, final chance, are you really here to tell us that somebody who voted to leave the European Union because they thought we could be like Norway or Switzerland actually voted to be nothing like Norway or Switzerland at all? And I'm going to insist on a yes or no.
I'm sorry, that is a trick question. They voted for...
It is not a trick question, Charles. You just can't answer it. We don't indulge, or we try not to indulge on this programme in esprit d'escalier when you kind of duff people up after they've gone. I don't know what the opposite of esprit d'escalier is, because I want to just take a moment to explain how Charles felt. He could ring in and use phrases like will of the people or power of the people or whatever it might be, and then not realise how weak a position that was. And that's not a criticism. I don't think anybody with a functioning intellect could have heard that exchange and concluded that that he did have a leg to stand on. And the reason is he repeats what he hears because he believes them and trusts them and wants to, and that's fine. That's what freedom of speech, freedom of press delivers. So he will hear a prominent Brexiter say something like 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union, you're thwarting the will of the people. And what he won't hear on the BBC or elsewhere, for reasons that I completely struggle still to understand, I've written about recently in the New Statesman magazine, I don't understand why other interviewers don't say to the politicians and the campaigners, well, hang on a minute, how can you claim that 17.4 million people all voted for the same thing when we know that some of them voted because they believed that we could be like Norway, which is in the single market but not the customs union, or they believed that we could be like Switzerland. I mean, it's on tape. You can hear them saying these things, which is in, I think, the single market and the customs union, but I'm not. This isn't a bridge I'm going to die on. Or you heard people say that we need them more than they need us, and we clearly know that's not true. Or you heard David Davis say that we'd be able to do deals with the Germans on the morning after the referendum, which is both factually and legally wrong. So all of these 17 and odd million people who all voted according to different pieces of information. Then you've got all the people who believed that £350 million a week was going to go to the NHS. And even if you want to ring me up and say that wasn't a pledge, that was just a suggestion, and everyone knew that the 350 million figure was gross rather than net. You can tell me that, but you can't tell somebody who did believe it that they didn't believe it. They did believe it. So now we know that's not true either. So if you believed Norway was the option, if you believed Switzerland was the option, if you believed it would be possible to carry on trading while abandoning things like freedom of movement, if you believed what was written on the side of the bus, if you believed David Davis's description of how trade negotiations worked, if you believed Liam Fox's prediction of how easy it would be to trade, if you believed Boris Johnson's lies about Turkey's imminent joining of the European Union, if you believed any of these things and you voted to leave, you categorically didn't vote for hard Brexit, no deal. So when the House of Lords yesterday insisted that the House of Commons must have the power to prevent a Prime Minister, an enfeebled Prime Minister, in hock to billionaire newspaper owners and editors, what you saw the House of Lords do yesterday was wrestle power from a government and deliver it to a sovereign parliament, in this case the House of Commons. I would love to know how anyone can be unhappy about that if they voted to leave the European Union in the belief that all our power had ended up in Brussels. I mean, this is insane, right? Even if you despise every fibre of my being and you're screaming at the radio, you have to stop and ask why you're so cross. You're cross because you have been taken for a mug, not by me, but by the people who are now claiming that 17.4 million people who demonstrably voted for very different things. Some people voted to leave the European Union and have no problem at all with immigration. Some people voted to leave the European Union exclusively because they've got a problem with immigration. You can't turn around and say they voted for the same thing. And yet that's what will of the people did. The will of the people, the phrase that didn't emerge until after the referendum, was actually the most fraudulent phrase of all. If there's one competition for will of the people being the most fraudulent phrase of all, do you know what it is? Yeah. Brexit means Brexit. 10:39. Matthew's in High Wycombe. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Sorry, not a Leave voter here. So, sorry, you're not a Leave voter here. But a quick point I wanted to make was a lot of the people calling in seem to be under the impression that the referendum was binding and that Parliament has to do exactly what the referendum says, and that's not true as far as I understand it. As usual, I blame David Cameron for all this nonsense. But the people calling in are assuming that...
Well, to be honest, I think you're going to be referring to other programmes, because I've only taken one call so far, and it's 22:11, but, you know, such is life. Carry on.
Sure. So what I'm just saying is the people calling in seem to think, oh, stab in the back, Parliament's going to screw us. There's nothing stopping Parliament from going back with whatever deal and passing legislation saying, let's have a second referendum.
Well, the Lords knocked that on the head, actually, yesterday. Because Labour wouldn't vote for that. But you're right, that is sovereignty. And I mean, at risk of sounding, I don't know, too masculine, the people you're describing don't generally ring me anymore because they get asked questions like the ones Charles got asked, and they're asked to explain how someone who voted to be like Norway. Here's Paul Nuttall. You remember him?
Yeah.
Here's Paul Nuttall before the referendum. Norway is a success, and we can be too. Outside the EU, we will prosper, be sovereign, and control our borders. So there's someone essentially marshalling the UKIP vote by saying we can be like Norway. Norway has free movement. Norway's in Schengen, but, you know, that's an argument that we should have had back in the day. You can't argue that 17.4 million people all voted for the same thing. And that's the real problem. So regardless of where power ends up, the idea that it is contained within that referendum result is palpably absurd. Why do you think people struggle to see it? You've clearly been listening to some of them try to explain themselves.
Well, I think a lot of it comes to people, honestly, and I think you've spoken to me a few times. So I'm from the Commonwealth, I'm not from here. And so I'm from a small country that generally doesn't get in the news unless things go horribly wrong, you know, being South Africa. But so people in Britain were, unhappy that Britain had lost power, the sense of imperial loss, no matter how ghastly some of the bits of the empire might have been. And they genuinely believed that Britain was more important than it is. Now and that it will therefore be again. Exactly. And the thing is I don't know about America, but there are countries in the world that seem to believe they are number one, but they work bloody hard to make it happen. I don't like China, but when I went there, everybody seemed to be kind of striving for some kind of weird...
There's epic poverty in parts of China as well, and the bits you'd see as a visiting Western businessman would not necessarily be emblematic of the population's general experience. Hang on, you're casting your net a little bit too far. You think you describe yourself as not being a Leave voter. So we'll speculate briefly before heading on to John in Sunbury. What's the problem with the idea of having power in Parliament and having, because you mentioned a second referendum, even more democracy? This is where I really struggle. Now that we all know more, because the fundamental tenet of a representative democracy is an informed electorate. Exactly. Speaking exclusively for myself and not for anybody else, I was criminally uninformed when I cast my vote in the referendum. I now know unbelievably more about what the European Union does and doesn't do. Therefore, I am, by definition, considerably more informed. Therefore, I am considerably more democratic. And therefore, I'm considerably keener to see a nationwide vote with a more informed electorate. The only argument against that would be people who preferred it when the electorate weren't informed.
Yeah, I think if you've got a strong product, you shouldn't have an issue with putting it back out in the shop stall or offering a returns policy, because you don't believe that anybody's going to come back and say, well, you know, this Brexit is defective. I would like another go. If you really think it's the bee's knees, well, then the British people will vote for it.
Well, that's the point. Now we've had a look over the precipice, we've had a look through the window, we know what the future holds, and we really, really like it. You were right all along. We're definitely going to vote for it. And then, of course, troublemakers like me come along and ask you to describe the view from that particular window, and you can't, and you blame me for that rather than the people who told you that it was all going to be unicorns and honey, which is fine. I will bear that cross as I sign my book deal. John's in Sunbury. John, what would you like to say?
James, you've been a bit uncomplimentary about David Davis and Liam Fox this morning.
No, I haven't. I've described things they said.
Yes, you have. You've slagged them off quite badly.
No, I haven't.
Now, let's have a look at who's running the EU.
No, let's not. Let's examine what you've just said. What did I say about David Davis that isn't demonstrably true and on the record?
Well, let's look at...
No, mate. You can't come on and say things. The whole point is...
about that, obviously.
The whole point is I challenge what people say. So what did I say about David Davis that is not on the record and demonstrably true, John?
Well, you said that, he wants to do a trade deal with Germany, and the next day...
He tweeted it.
Very well he couldn't do.
He tweeted that. There were 4 separate tweets talking about what would happen on the morning after the referendum result. We will be in Germany negotiating not with Brussels but with Berlin. Right, so next example then?
Let's have a look at who's running the EU.
No, John, let's have a look at you saying that I slagged off David Davis and Liam Fox. So first example failed. Next example?
Complimentary about them.
Next example?
Sorry?
Next example?
Say that again, sorry?
The next example of me saying something about them that isn't demonstrably true.
You said, you've been very uncomplimentary about these guys.
No, I've reminded you of things they said.
You're quite happy to be quite content with the likes of Juncker and Tusk.
John, we need you to prove the things that I said about Davis and Fox that aren't true and on the record, because every single thing I said this morning is true and on the record, John. So if you're going to come on and
True on the record, yes.
and the first thing you're going to say is not true, it means you've kind of undermined everything that you say afterwards. So I'm giving you a really good opportunity to prove that what you said was true. What have I said about David Davis or Liam Fox that isn't published on the record?
Right, no. What you did say about David Davis, it may have been true.
It's not slagging him off then, is it?
Well, yeah, you're putting him down, really.
No, mate, I'm reminding you of the words he used to convince you to vote to leave the European Union, words that turned out to be
James, all
untrue.
I can say to you, when Brexit proves to be a success...
What will success look like, John?
...becomes untenable. Do you understand that?
Yes, mate, of course it does.
Yeah,
What does
I'm
success
sure you
look
do.
like? What does success look like?
Well, out of the EU, not being governed by Germany...
How does Germany govern us? If today's whole phone-in is about the House of Lords delivering power to the House of Commons, where did Germany come into that?
You mean about the coffin dodgers in the House of Lords?
Oh, hang on, I thought you were uncomfortable with people being rude.
Well, yeah, I'll be rude about them.
Okay, you be rude as you want. So just talk me through how Germany influenced the vote in the House of Lords yesterday.
Germany run the EU.
Yeah, so how did they deliver that verdict in the House of Lords yesterday?
Who said they did? I didn't.
You
say
did.
that.
You said Germany governs us.
Yeah, Germany governs the EU.
So how did Germany make the
decision?
decision to pass that amendment in the House of Lords yesterday?
Yes.
So how did Germany make the decision to pass that amendment in the House of Lords, John?
Let me talk.
John, I can't let you talk twaddle, mate. It embarrasses you and it insults my listeners. How did Germany govern it?
Your position with BC becomes untenable when...
The word is untenable, John.
Do you understand that?
I know what untenable means. I don't know what intenable means, no.
Untenable. Well, you know what I'm getting at. Your position with...
So let's
LBC
try
when it
once
exists.
more, John. How did Germany deliver that amendment in the House of Lords yesterday?
Germany did not deliver that amendment yesterday.
But they
What I
govern
said
us.
was Germany...
But they
Germany
govern us.
run the EU.
But they govern us.
Yeah, but most...
So if
listen,
they
James,
govern
most-
us, how did the House of Lords pass that amendment yesterday, giving power to the House of Commons? Where did Germany come into
Germany
it?
rule the EU. Everything done in the EU suits Germany.
Right.
Okay?
Yes, John.
And you know the House of Lords, James, most of those people in the House of Lords have either worked for the EU or are currently still working for the EU.
Okay, so here's what we'll do. We'll come back after the break, John, and we'll have a list of everybody in the House of Lords, and we'll start with the A's and we'll work right through to the Z's, and you tell me which ones used to work for the European Union.
For example,
And then we'll
yeah.
count them,
Here's
John.
one for you.
We'll count them, and you have to prove that more than half of them worked for the European Union. Do you want to accept that challenge?
Yeah, I could do. Yeah, most of them are still on fat pensions.
So I'm going to come back after the news with a list of everyone in the House of Lords. There's hundreds of people, and you're going to tell me which ones worked for the European Union. And at the end of that process, you're going to be able to prove that it's more than half of them, John, because you said most.
I would say that, yes.
Oh, crikey. Well, hold on to your hats, everybody. 10:48 is the time. And fair play to John in Sunbury for accepting the challenge. He's of the view that describing the words used by David Davis and Liam Fox is slagging them off. And he considers the House of Lords to be full of coffin dodgers, most of whom have been in the pay of the European Union. So we're going to go through the list of people in the House of Lords together, aren't we, John? And you're going to tell me the ones that are in the pay of the European Union or who have ever worked there or who have got pensions that they need to hang on to. And when we've gone through all of them, we'll count them up. I think it's about 785. Well, we'll check anyway. And you will then have proof that most of them are EU flunkies. So we'll start with the A's and work through, John, when you're ready, mate. Lord Aberdare, is he someone that has worked for the European Union or someone who has not? John? John? But John, you were so adamant. What do you mean you hung up and we called you back 3 times after you promised that you'd do it? And you refused to. What about Lord Adams or Baroness Adams of Craigley, John? Most of the House of Lords are paid by the EU. What about Lord Addington, John? John? Lord Adibawale? Lord Adonis? Baroness Afshar, John? Lord Agnew of Alton? John? Can we make sure he's all right? 10:53. I mean, physically. Tom's in Cheltenham. Tom, what would you like to say?
Yes, good morning, James.
Hello, Tom.
I voted leave at the referendum, and I haven't got an issue at all with the Lords. I think they were just doing their job yesterday, and good on them for doing it. I think the real problem will come is if when the vote actually happens in the Commons and the 85% of the MPs who stood on the platform of coming out of the European Union, the customs union, and the single market will vote.
See, I don't like that argument either. I understand why you make it, and I've had my fun for this.
The will of the people
but it wasn't, though, was it? Because I voted for one of the two main parties, and I don't want to come out. No, but Tom, here's the thing. Tom, I know.
It's in the manifesto.
Yes, but
85%.
No, but
everybody should have voted Liberal Democrat if they think like you, James.
I voted for one of the two main parties, but I didn't vote to leave the customs union and the single market. So I'm just one person. I'm fairly confident, and I know that you know this, Tom, and I'm not going to insult you by asking why you're pretending not to. There's no earthly way that Theresa May went to the country to get a mandate for her Brexit plans and ended up with a reduced majority. You cannot use that as evidence that people wanted her to have an enhanced majority for her Brexit plans, can you, Tom?
Well, either you're saying the people who voted in the election.
No, Tom, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you what I'll do. I've given you my example, right? I voted for one of the two main parties, and I did not vote to leave the customs union and the single market.
Well,
and
you should have withheld your vote.
That's fine. But now I'm just going to go randomly to the next caller. Joshua's in Coventry. Joshua, did you vote for one of the two main parties in the last general election?
I did, yes.
And did you vote to leave the customs union and the single market deliberately?
I was happy. When I voted leave, I was happy that might be an outcome.
So you specifically voted to leave the customs union and the single market in the last election?
In the last election? Well, yeah, I felt like that was one of the things the Conservatives did.
But Labour as well.
I was okay with that.
That's what Labour were promising. That's what Labour were promising as well.
Yeah, I would have probably voted Conservative anyway, which is your point.
And back to Tom.
Yeah, okay. Well, it was an expression of the will of the people.
But it wasn't, was it?
Yeah, it was.
But we've just shown that it wasn't, Tom. All I have to do is find people that voted for the Conservatives or Labour who want to remain in the European Union, and your whole point falls to pieces.
Well, they're charlatans then, aren't they? Because they shouldn't be standing on a manifesto that they don't believe in.
Well, you could say that, I suppose. And finally, why are you cross that Parliament has so much power?
I'm not cross. That's what I voted for. I mean, we've always got the Parliament Act, don't forget. The Lords is a revising chamber, and I voted leave because of what David Cameron said.
What was that?
Interested in. He basically said, if you vote to come out of the European Union, you'll be coming out of the single market and the customs union.
But that was Project Fear. The people that you voted for told you that you wouldn't.
This is the man who put the proposition to
Yes, but that was Project Fear. No one ever cast a vote because they believed the people on the other side. You cast a vote because you believed the people on your side, and the people on your side said only a madman is talking about leaving the single market.
Mr.
Yes.
No, it is.
Yes. No, yes.
No,
yes.
not at all.
Well, I'm afraid it's true. David Davis said we'd be in Berlin the morning after the result. Owen Paterson said that only a madman would leave the single market. Daniel Hannan said absolutely nobody is talking about leaving the single market. But you cast your vote because you believed the people on the other side of the argument, not the people on your own side.
No, I didn't believe in our Prime Minister and what he was trying to sell me.
Oh, but you just said you voted for him because you did believe him.
No, I didn't believe...
So when he said we'd have to leave the customs union and the single market, you didn't believe him?
I didn't agree with his proposal to the British public.
So when he said we'd have to leave the customs union and the single market, you didn't believe him?
I believed him in that respect.
Oh, okay,
yes,
but not all the other respects.
Well, no, but I rejected the proposition that he was putting towards the British. Well, no.
Well, you didn't reject it, mate. You just rang me up to tell me that you believed him, Tom. Categorically, you just said, I believed David Cameron when he said we would have to leave the customs union and the single market. And in the same breath, you said you cast your vote because you didn't believe what David Cameron said. You didn't believe the proposition that he put to the British people.
I didn't believe in Project Fear.
Well, you did, Tom. Joshua's in Coventry. Joshua, why are we cross that Parliament has so much power, do you think? think?
So I think a lot of people will be cross that they've exercised their power in the way that they did because they may feel that they've reduced the power of the elected government.
Well, the elected government that's propped up by 10 DUP votes bought with £1 billion of taxpayers' money.
That's the one.
So the anger comes from the fact that the government can't do what it wants regardless of what Parliament wants.
Well, no, I don't think that's... I think it's fully sort of... it's constitutionally the right thing. That, it's within everyone's right, but you can still be upset. Not that you think that they've acted unconstitutionally, but that you think that they've made, as it turns out, the wrong decision. And that's my view. Is I just feel that they've made the wrong decision because they have undermined, to a degree, the negotiating position.
How? And you heard my analogy about the house when you're negotiating to buy a house, and if you pull out and walk away, you've still got your old house. But in the context of the European Union, you pull out and walk away, you haven't even got your old house. How is that a strong negotiating position, Joshua?
Well, usually when you buy and sell a house, there's two transactions, right? There's selling your house and there's buying another one.
Yes.
And it can sometimes...
We're going to run out of time. I'll come to you. I think we may carry on with this. Stay where you are. I'm having fun. What's that? You are too? Oh, splendid. Hang on. Any sign of John in Sunbury? Can we try again with John? Remember? John? Calling John. To recap, the claims today are that people who voted to be like Norway, which is in the single market, definitely voted to leave the single market. The other claim is that... What was the other claim? Oh, yeah. A negotiating tactic involves being able to chop your own arms off if the other side don't give you what you want. I'm going to be a bit more generous on that second one. It seems to me absurd to suggest that we somehow derive strength from threatening to be homeless. But I could be maybe oversimplifying things. Let's find out. Joshua in Coventry thinks that it is a negotiating tactic that we've somehow surrendered. So what do you think the European Union would have been worried about if no deal was still on the table?
Yeah, so I guess the option of walking away, and if we walked away and we were able to negotiate some trade deals, elsewhere in the world, and we didn't negotiate the same kinds of trade deal with the EU, then their salespeople would be at a disadvantage to salespeople in other countries around the world.
But there'd still be 500 million people in that market and 60 million in ours.
Yeah, it's true, but they don't want to confine their salespeople to just that market. Well,
they don't, do they? They've got 30-odd trade deals with everyone from South Korea to Japan.
Okay, sorry, because we're talking over each other. What were you saying?
Well, the European Union has way more trade deals already with countries outside the European Union than we will have when we leave.
Indeed. Well, we will have zero when we leave, right? So, yeah. But the gambit, the idea, what you're punting on, if you think that leaving without a deal is perhaps going to help you, you're punting on the idea that it's taken the EU ages to get the deals it's got, and you think that a country like...
It took the other side the same amount of time
to negotiate a trade deal faster than they do because we don't have to get agreement from everyone else in the EU.
Unless we're still trading with the EU.
Well, unless we accept... unless we're trading with the EU on the terms of the common market. So that's the only
terms. That's the only terms we can trade with them on.
Well, no, that's not true. So,
yes, no, it is.
The Canada option is... I mean, certainly there's...
Because I hear a lot about this, and I apologise for asking you this question, because if you can't answer it, it's no embarrassment to you. Liam Fox and David Davis can't answer it either. I just never get to ask them. What in the Canada deal allows them... What are the areas of the Canada trade deal, of CETA, where they're allowed to sell into the European Union not following European Union regulations and legislation?
Oh, so that's the key thing. Is so as I'm a Canadian. And
yes.
My dad has a Canadian company, and so he can sell to for instance, to the US and to the EU, but when selling to the US, he has to, the products that he sends to the US comply with their laws. But it doesn't mean that he's restricted to only producing those kinds of products. He can...
No, but the question was, when he's selling to the EU, does he have to obey the EU laws?
That's right.
Yeah, so when I said that we can't trade with the EU without obeying and observing their legislation, I was describing the reality that your father experiences. You're positing this is the punt. No, I need to. I do understand you. I just need to clarify. This is the gamble that we would somehow be able, as a manufacturing company, and you just heard in the news where our output and growth is now. We'd have two lines of supply. We could sell to markets that obeyed the European Union regulation. And then we could also sell to markets that had lower levels of regulation. And at the moment, as a European Union member, we struggle to do that.
Such as China.
Yes, I'm with you. And that's the risk.
As you can tell from the fact I'm in Coventry, there's a very good chance I worked in the automotive industry.
Yes, and the automotive industry has been pretty, close to unanimous on the dangers of leaving the single market.
They have been. I think the main problem that we're facing is the uncertainty of it all. So I recognise that's, it's like...
I've got to be honest with you, Joshua.
The status quo to continue, right? So that's all the sort of senior managers in my company lined up and said, we're not going to tell you how to vote, but definitely vote Remain.
Yes.
And a lot of people in the company didn't. They voted Leave anyway.
Same in Sunderland, even more so, actually. Is it still Ryton, the Peugeot plant at Ryton?
So I was just going to say, I think a lot of these managers, they are oftentimes, particularly my company, and particularly I think in the industry as a whole, they're very conservative people, but not uppercase conservative. They're very risk-averse people, and they've never lived outside of the EU. They've always been inside the EU. I've sort of seen the world outside the EU. I don't think it's so scary. So, I mean, obviously, it would... When I looked at all the options and I saw that, there's bad case scenarios inside the EU, bad case scenarios outside, and obviously there's very bad case scenarios outside, but I just looked at all the options, weighed up the probabilities, and I thought, I still think it's worth a gambit.
I like you, Joshua. I could talk to you all day. I don't know that we'd ever... You still think it's a good idea? You still think it's worth the gamble?
I have to say, this government in particular, I said, when I weighed it up, I thought the worst case scenario was, Corbyn as the leader. And the second worst case scenario has to be something like this particular government. I'm very disappointed with them. But I will tell you, James, this is the thing. I looked at if I was only going to have, I felt like this is once in a lifetime.
Yes.
If we stay in, we're going to have to track with these guys for another 50 years or so before we get another crack at it.
Yes.
And who knows where they're going to go, the EU, in that time period. And I just thought, I have a young child.
I get this.
Like
this is it. This is for me.
When he first comes to vote, he's going to have more power to influence. So even if Jeremy
he's
Corbyn
not though, and I completely disagree with you, completely and utterly. But I like you, and you and I could have a fruitful debate, couldn't we?
All right. We could.
I just wish we'd done it before the referendum. And also, before you go, I need to just point out the trade theory of gravity. The idea that you replace trade with a market that is you can swim to. You replace that with China.
We wouldn't say just China. I mean, North America.
That's also somewhere you can't swim to.
What do you mean swim to? Oh, you mean, swim.
Well, I think that's the trade theory of gravity, isn't it? That you inevitably gravitate towards the markets that are geographically closest to you. And the bigger the product, i.e. a car, the more pertinent that theory becomes.
No, I get that. But the thing is that there's other things to consider, which is like the... Shipping, for instance, is the main problem. With the trade theory of gravity is based on shipping being the main problem. There's a lot of products that don't get shipped.
Yeah, but we were talking about cars.
Well, indeed, but in our...
What doesn't get shipped?
Also.
You mean by boat, as opposed to just the process of transporting something?
I was thinking more of like software and stuff like that. Software and services. I guess they're not products, are they?
Yeah, well, no, that's not part of manufacturing either.
Well, it's increasingly a part of manufacturing, actually. If you think
services aren't. Software kind of is. So this would be, you'd send it down a wire. You'd send it down a wire rather than over a sea.
We could debate about that. So things are changing in manufacturing towards more of a service model. But anyway, even when it comes to manufacturing, there's other things such as homologation, which is trying to meet regulations and stuff like that. There's other things that add cost in that can balance against the cost of transport, and kind of,
but not if you then introduce tariffs as well, of course. So for you, just genuinely, and I promise you that my affection and fondness for talking to you is completely sincere. I sometimes worry that people don't believe me when I'm being nice, because it's so rare. And I accept. I don't fully accept the idea that things could have gone much better and it's all the fault of this government. But I can't prove that any more than you can. So we'll leave that parked. At what point, roughly, would you expect to have enough evidence to reach a conclusion about whether we've done the right thing or the wrong thing? Where are you looking at calendar-wise? With particular reference to the automotive industry, because I know it very well. It was my father's patch in the Midlands for 20 years. With particular reference to the automotive industry, when would you expect to be able to turn around and say, oops, I made a mistake. Luckily, I can move to Canada. None of these other people can. Or, ha-ha, yes, onwards and upwards.
Right. I suppose it's not like an on-off thing. I think that we're getting more and more clarity as days go on. So obviously, after the Irish border thing gets sorted out, then we have to think about the actual trade deals. Then you'd also have to consider the trade deals that we can strike elsewhere in the world. Yes. I personally would feel like we could get more confidence if the government were working on deals in principle elsewhere. Yeah. And if we had some of those lined, I would have, if I had been, what's his name, the Cameron guy, I would have actually worked on that before the referendum.
Not his job, though. I guess that's another kind of historical revisionism. I think we're doing something disastrous, but I'm going to prepare for it, despite the fact that all the people who are persuading the public that it's a brilliant idea aren't doing any preparation whatsoever. Can leave a lot at the door of David Cameron. So you didn't answer my question. 5 years, 10 years? I know it's a bit binary, but go on.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, but roughly.
Okay. I think by 5 years we should certainly have a much better view than we have now. Once the negotiations are all done, I think that we will have a better view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there was a second referendum now, with this government in charge?
I still would leave because I can return to the other point that I can ditch May, I could ditch Corbyn, or I could contribute to ditching them, but I can't contribute to ditching the other guys in the EU. They're just.
And why did you want to?
First of all, I don't like that they're controlling my country's trade policy, or the country I live in, its trade policy.
But they'll be controlling it if we sign a trade agreement with them. That was the one thing we agreed on first.
They'll only control our trade policy with them.
Yes.
They won't stop us from doing deals with other parts of the world. So one of the things.
So it's all about the deals. And do you know what? If these deals occur, I'll ring you back in Coventry and I'll shake you by the hand. Seriously. If the deals are there that will not only replace but enhance, so we'll end up better than we are now, I will bring a piece of humble pie around to your house and eat it in your kitchen, as long as you promise not to phone the authorities.
I admit that a lot of my vote hangs on.
I've got to go to the break. I don't want you to feel that you're squeezed, but we're waiting for the deals on, not the unicorns, the trade deals on the horizon that would leave Britain in a stronger economic position than full membership of the biggest single market on the planet provides.
Yeah, and on the other side, we're waiting to see whether or not there's bailouts in Europe. Okay, sorry.
I've got to go. And I really did enjoy talking to you, not least because I would describe you as an intelligent leaver. And God knows they're thin on the ground. Jamie Oliver sitting before the Select Committee at 3:15 this afternoon, along with sundry other academics and experts looking at the government. It's a cross-party obesity strategy. It's actually a really important day, although there are no opportunities to frighten you or encourage you to feel angry, so it won't get the coverage that other issues get. What they've managed to do, and we'll be talking to Jamie about this in about 25 minutes, what they've managed to do is wrestle the issue away from party politics. So if you're serious about health, this is oddly why the idea of taking the whole of the NHS outside of government control is strangely attractive. Because when it becomes a party political plaything, the problems start. So what you had under Blair and Brown and Cameron was a sense that they were listening and there was some movement in the right direction on childhood obesity strategy. And then when Theresa May got in, there was a sense that the ball had been dropped. So what the last 18 months have seen Jamie Oliver and others do is try to knit together a broad coalition of politicians from all parties, including Theresa May's government, so that an obesity strategy can remain in place regardless of who's in Downing Street. And we'll find out in about 25 minutes how optimistic Jamie is that they have managed to do that. A couple of phone lines. 30345 606 0973 is a number to call. I did enjoy talking to Joshua. A few of you have pointed out there are a couple of things I shouldn't have left unchallenged. I don't know if that's true. I challenge everything people complain, and then I don't challenge enough people complain. Such is life. But yeah, once we've sorted out the Irish border is a statement of uncommon optimism, and the idea that the success of Brexit will hinge upon the trade that we can do with countries other than the European Union in the future. Especially if those countries already have a trade deal with the European Union, it's a little bit unicorny, but it is at least rational, up to a point. So there are still reasons to be cheerful, but you won't know whether they're going to come true for a minimum of 5 years. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Peter is in Gillingham. Peter, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I phoned early. Do you want to talk about the first issue or the negotiation one?
Take your pick.
Well, I'll pick up your phrase of cognitive dissonance, if I may, James. I'm an amateur psychologist. Actually, I'm a business school tutor, so we know what that means. But in case your listeners don't, it's when your ideas clash with the worldview in your mind and there's an uncomfortable feeling.
No, I thought it was when you simultaneously believe two contradictory things, like going to church while also being a kind of intellectual atheist.
Yes. Or being lied to doesn't help.
No, we need to be clear on what cognitive dissonance means, because you were quite patronising then to a lot of my listeners, and then you got it wrong.
Well, all right, then get me right.
Okay, it's when you simultaneously hold two contradictory positions.
Yeah, I didn't express it clearly, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, carry on.
And both sides of this debate have experienced cognitive dissonance. The Remainers believe that it was an advisory referendum, as the caller mentioned.
No, I don't.
They feel.
No, it was in the leaflet that went through all our letterboxes. Technically, it was an advisory referendum, but I think that's kind of hair splitting. The leaflet said the government will deliver whatever the verdict is. So I think the advisory thing is a red herring. I don't actually know anyone who would argue that passionately.
Well, I would, because referendums that are binding are normally 66%. We didn't do.
Yeah, but I don't think anyone voted thinking it was just advisory. I think everybody on either side both thought this result, and I agree with you that the gap should have been bigger for it to be more meaningful. But I think that's a red herring to say that there's cognitive dissonance about it being advisory.
All right. Well, so they feel a little let down, and yes, you're right. They probably did know for the most part that was going to happen.
Not even for the most part. I don't think anybody who voted to remain thinks it shouldn't happen because it didn't really mean anything, that vote. I think that's a really silly suggestion, mate, with respect.
Well, I'll accept that.
Yeah.
We'll agree to disagree on that. But the legal...
Well, hang on. I hate agreeing to disagree when the person who's agreeing to disagree doesn't understand what it is they're agreeing to disagree about. You're seriously claiming that a significant proportion of people who voted to remain didn't think that a vote to leave would mean anything?
I think a lot of people who voted for Remain read all the literature that's buried away in the government, and they do know that it was an advisory referendum.
But the literature categorically stated that they would deliver according to the result.
Well, the literature coming through the door.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So I think there are not a significant proportion. A proportion of people still believe it was an opinion poll.
Oh, well, okay, we can agree to disagree about that.
Yeah. Right.
It wasn't an opinion poll.
Yeah, the Leavers are the worst kind of winners, it seems.
We can definitely agree about that.
I myself have been punched by a Leaver for doing what you do on a daily basis. And I've been working with 30 EU citizens, one of whom has been threatened with being set alight. And I was in a pub talking to a Leaver the other night, and I said, do you think it's fair to set people alight because their views disagree with yours? And they said, well, and I explained this.
Oh, we can't use them as. I mean, I appreciate but we can't use them as an example of the whole. Even I wouldn't do that, mate. I mean, I'm not suggesting you deserve to get punched, but if you're telling all leavers that they approve of setting fire to foreigners,
not all leavers.
No,
I'm using a specific example.
All right.
But I myself have, argued vigorously to try and get to some resolution of this.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if conversation doesn't happen, then other means are used. So I've been working with these 30 citizens, and they've had all sorts done because people won't talk, which is what you do so well.
Well, I think there's plenty of people who want to punch me, mate.
Well, I don't right now, and I can't.
We're not going to agree to disagree about that, are we?
No.
Go on.
We're never going to get over this unless we realise that the people who did it to us on both sides actually need to take responsibility. We need to start fighting amongst ourselves, which is what they have us doing. And I was so impassioned. I'm afraid I'm a Remainer, James. I'm sorry, it's not who you want to hear from on the show, maybe.
Well, a bit of variety is the spice of life, Peter.
But
I probably, if I realised that in advance, I wouldn't have duffed you up so much on the cognitive dissonance thing.
Oh, okay, all right. Well it's going to be a love fest in a minute, isn't it?
Carry on.
But, I do see some of the leavers' points. And I actually think we were all right to.
Yeah.
But we won't solve this by fighting amongst ourselves. And these EU citizens are so driven that they've written a song called In Limbo, which is in the charts in Amazon this week.
I shall dig it out. I shall have a look at it. And that's your concern, is the people who have had... Because we can talk about, and much as I liked Joshua in Coventry, the notion of sitting and waiting to see if things turn out all right is particularly hard for... Not just businesses, but in your case, individuals who've had their future turned upside down. Daniel Hannan it was, who insisted that EU citizens would not have their rights affected in any way, and yet they still don't know what their future holds.
Exactly. So David Davis and Mr. Fox must have read
Dr.
the Penguin
Fox.
book of... No, Dr. Fox, sorry. Is he a real doctor?
Yes, he is a real doctor, mate. He's qualified to look at your bunions, but possibly not to do trade deals.
Instead of reading Sun Tzu and other books, they read the Penguin Book of Negotiations. There's a thing in negotiation called a BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated answer. And it works in a car showroom. When you buy a car and you price it too much, you walk out.
Yes.
That's fine. It does not work in a complex, globally connected world where you'll still have to deal with the bloody car showroom
Exactly.
the following day.
Or you take your old car to the scrap heap without knowing how you're going to get home, and then you start cheering as the crusher comes down and smashes the old car to smithereens because it's the will of the people and we've taken back the power, but we don't know how we're going to get home now because we just smashed up the old car.
And, I know facts are inconvenient, but this whole thing of global trade, we do trade, obviously, around the world already. We pretty well saturated that trade. I was at the Commonwealth thing last week, chasing Theresa May around the town. And this whole fact that you've used a few times, if you double the distance, you halve the trade. It's a logarithmic law, but it's not a mathematical law, but it's one of those unfortunate things.
Yeah.
You can't just shift with a white paper.
Because it's counting. It's not a matter of opinion. And you count the amount of miles you have to transport something. The attraction of doing that deal diminishes according to how far away it is. Although Joshua pointed out that software wouldn't necessarily... Well, software definitely wouldn't fall under that anymore. I'm not sure that's enough to make up for the damage it might do to his own industry, automotive. Peter, thank you, mate. Thank you for indulging my sore head at the beginning of the call. It's 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know what? Usually the penny drops a bit quicker. I wonder if we should have asked what we think Parliament is for today. I know what you're thinking. We probably should have asked that before the referendum. But what do you think Parliament is for? Seems like a question that underpins all of, or most of, the conversations that we've had today. I just want to draw something else to your attention as well, because I think it's a mark of the way that politics has gone over the last couple of years. Somebody called Lord John Kill Clooney, who sits in the Lords, I think, for the Osler Unionists. He is, in fact, a former MEP. Let's get John in Bromley up. I found one, John. I found a bloke in the House of Lords who is a former MEP, so probably does get a European Union pension. Oh, No, still not answering. But he's replied to a news story about Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, visiting Northern Ireland. And Lord John Kilclooney, as I say, a former Ulster Unionist politician, well, still is, I suppose, isn't he? He held a cabinet position in the Northern Irish government and has had seats in both the European Parliament and Westminster. There's a news story here about Leo Varadkar, as I say, the Irish Taoiseach, and he's tweeted, "Typical Indian." Be very interesting to see how that plays out in this curious landscape of Windrush and anti-Semitism and sundry other apparent double standards on the part of politicians. You know my new theory, if we can just find rules and then agree that everybody has to obey them. So if you were comfortable with a president mocking disabled people, you can't really be offended by a comedian mocking a White House spokeswoman's eyeshadow. If you're not following that story, I actually envy you. So, typical Indian. I don't even know what that means. That's probably my problem, isn't it, when I'm dealing with racists? I genuinely don't know what they mean when they say typical Indian. Isn't that like saying typical... what? Typical pink person? Typical European? Typical Brit? What is it? Is it a compliment, perhaps? Yeah. That bit was rhetorical. 11:37 is the time. Back to Brexit. I don't know when we'll return to it, but every now and then a story pops that demands our attention, and this House of Lords defeat for the government yesterday certainly fits into that category. Lots of people very, very unhappy about Parliament having so much power and using it to enshrine the sovereignty of Parliament, in this case the House of Commons. So just to be absolutely clear, the House of Lords voted democratically last night to entrust the House of Commons, the elected chamber, with full scrutiny. In fact, it entrusted the House of Commons with the power to prevent a power grab by the Prime Minister. This is practically Magna Carta stuff. This could prove to be one of the most significant pieces of parliamentary business of the century. Genuinely. Because it prevents the Prime Minister from riding roughshod over parliamentary sovereignty. Now, what I find myself baffled by is people who claimed that they voted in the Brexit referendum because they felt too much power was in Brussels and parliamentary sovereignty has been compromised. Today, led by the front page of the Daily Mail, today they are being encouraged to be cross about the amount of power and sovereignty that Westminster clearly possesses. And I haven't really unravelled that psychodrama, for which I apologise. Jack's in Birmingham. Jack, maybe you can help. What would you like to say?
How are you doing, James?
Hello, Jack. I'm all good, mate.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, I can't remember the caller's name, but you were asking a caller earlier about, is it reasonable to expect that individuals could have voted for leaving the EU based on different principles, such as like having a Norwegian-style deal, Britain-style deal, etc.? I'm a Leave voter, 26. I'm on the younger side of the generation for this vote. But I think it's entirely reasonable for you to say that is what people...
Well, it's the blunt nature of the will of the people rhetoric that offends me, because I know people who voted to leave the European Union expecting that we would set up like Switzerland or Norway because they weren't obsessed with immigration. But anyone obsessed with immigration who was told by their cheerleaders that we could be like Norway or Switzerland was being lied to.
Sure. But this is what I think the problem is. I think that, for me personally, I think that the question itself on the actual ballot paper, should we leave the EU, I think that was a black and white question. I think that was very, well, for me at least anyway, I think that voting to leave the EU meant leaving the EU, and that included everything with the EU. However...
But then anybody, you know that anybody who heard Owen Paterson say only a madman would leave the single market also voted in the same lobby that you did.
But the issue, I think the issue is this, is that people, it's entirely right that people should have had the... reason to believe that, right, if I vote to leave the EU, there is a possibility, keyword being possibility, that I could have a Norwegian-style deal or a Switzerland-style deal. However, there wasn't anything on the ballot paper that said, this is what you are going to vote for, leave, like, deal-wise.
And there wasn't anything on the ballot paper that said the opposite either, which is what they're now claiming. Right. Everybody voted knowingly to leave the customs union and the single market. We know that's not true.
And I mean, look, there's always going to be things that I fully appreciate as a Leave voter. There's going to be loads of things that you can ask me questions of that, the fact that, you know, makes me look like an idiot. And that for your Remain voters would think, well, we got you there, you're a Leave voter, you should have done that for this reason. But equally, I think there's many things that Leave voters could turn around to Remain voters and say, well, actually, here's a reasonable reason why we should leave, and they would caveat the same reason.
Go on.
So it's, at the end of the day, I think moving on to the point with the House of Lords.
No, I'm not being funny, but you did just say it would be really easy to make Remain voters look a bit silly by pointing out really good stuff about leaving.
Well, for example, like democratically wise, I haven't been able to find a Remain voter yet that's been able to convince me why I should remain in the EU when I have no democratic vote on the individuals that run it, e.g. Donald Tusk.
Well, you don't have a democratic vote on the man who's leading. Ollie Robbins, the civil servant who's in charge of our negotiations, or anyone else in the civil service.
Yeah, correct. But I think we both both got each other there. That equally.
Well, no, we didn't, mate. You said the EU's worse than us, and I pointed out that the process of democratic accountability is exactly the same. And if the MEPs elect the Commission, and you vote for the MEPs, but that's a bit of a blind alley because you said it would be easy for you to make a Remainer look silly by pointing out good things about the EU.
Well, that was a good point in terms of.
But it's exactly the same as the relationship between Parliament, the government, and the civil service.
Correct, but you haven't been out. You got me there, but correctly, you can't give me a good reason why I should remain in the EU when I can't vote.
Because we have free trade with the largest single market on the planet.
Yep, that's one other point. I'm asking you specifically with regards to Donald Tusk. Where is my democratic vote for Donald Tusk, for example?
Well, where is your democratic vote for the head of the civil service?
There we go. You're making my point perfectly.
So you want to get rid of the civil service? You think we should have a referendum on that?
No, I'm simply saying that there's things that you could ask me, such as the question you just asked, that I won't be able to answer because it's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
But equally, there's questions that I can ask you, such as the Donald Tusk one, that you will not answer.
You find a party that's standing in the Euro. You can't now because you voted to leave, so it's a fairly pointless inquiry. But you find a party that's represented in the European elections and belongs to a bloc that would not want Donald Tusk to be in charge, and then you elect them, and night follows day.
But that's not my. I don't really agree with that point, but that's not me.
Which bits don't you agree with?
For that bit, because you're saying that if I vote for a party based on their manifesto, of that they will do this and that, I think you and I both know that most parties don't fulfil most of their manifesto pledges. They do fulfil some, fair enough, but not all of them. So it's not a guarantee.
Only in the European Parliament or in Westminster as well.
No, I think both.
Right.
I voted Conservative in the last one, and I full well know that not every single thing that was in their manifesto.
So all of the things that you've cited as reasons to leave the European Union, you've ended up saying that it's exactly the same in Britain. I guess the only difference is perhaps the nationality of the elected representatives as opposed to the nationality of MPs. Jack, cheers, mate. I've got to crack on.